I'm going to discuss something nobody discusses. 1 million simulations show that the debt in the United States is on an unsustainable path. U.S. national debt is on unsustainable course. Simulations show. This is Fox Business. Wow. What does all that mean? What does that mean, unsustainable path? Well, what it means is we're going to have a depression. Inflation, stagnation, then inflation. Now let's dig into this. The United States is almost certainly on an unsustainable path with regard to the astronomical rise in its national debt, according to 1 million simulations run by Bloomberg. 1 million computer simulations. Wow. Bloomberg reported that it conducted 1 million simulations on the U.S. debt outlook and found 88% of them borrowing is on an unsustainable path. And the findings come after a forecast by the Congressional Budget Office that indicates the national debt will grow to an astounding $54 trillion in the next decade, next 10 years. It's at $34 trillion right now. The result of an aging population, rising federal health care costs. That's not why. Because these politicians spend like drunken Marxists. That's why. Payments are expected to triple from nearly $475 billion in fiscal 2022 to a stunning $1.4 trillion in 2032. That's interest. That's payment for interest. In 8 years, $1.4 trillion. By 2053, 30 years from now, the interest payments are projected to surge to $5.4 trillion. To put it into perspective, that'll be more than the U.S. spends on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and all other mandatory and discretionary spending programs combined. Combined. When factoring in the market's current outlook and interest rates, the debt-to-GDP ratio is expected to rise to 123% in 2034. Now, what does that mean? The debt to all the gross domestic product, that is, all goods and services produced, the debt-to-GDP ratio means for every dollar that we produce in this country, we will owe the government $1.23 in 8 years. And yet, they write, that's a fairly optimistic outlook, given the assumption in Washington that the sweeping tax law passed in 2017 by former President Trump will likely be extended. Notice how they always twist it. Notice the problem is always that they don't tax us enough and you don't get to keep enough of your money. The problem is that they spend too damn much. Now, in a higher simulation scenario, the debt-to-GDP burden could be as high as 134% in 2034, 185% in 2050. So that would mean in 26 short years, for every dollar that we, the people, produce in goods and services, we will owe the government $1.85. Should the debt materialize, it could risk America's economic standing in the world. Are they out of their minds? Should the debt materialize, you're going to need a wheelbarrow to move your money around. I'd like to always take these issues deeper. We sit here, we wring our hands, we shake our heads, and then I say to myself, but do the majority of the American people, but certainly a majority of the ruling class does not, do they really give a damn about anything but today? Bernie Sanders, that's all he's about. Joe Biden, that's all they're about. What about tomorrow? What about our kids and grandkids and generations yet born? So I raised this question. You may have heard of this book, Plunder and Deceit, when I wrote this many years ago. Can we simultaneously love our children but betray their generation and generations yet born? Because that's what we're doing. Among the least acknowledged facts of American modernity is the extent to which parents, acting in their familial capacity, naturally and tenaciously guard their young children from threat and peril. to the point of risking their own physical and economic security in extreme cases. However, as part of the political and governing community, in other words, as the aggregate, that is, the ruling generation is what I call it, many of these same parents wittingly and unwittingly join with other parents in tolerating, if not enthusiastically championing, disadvantageous and even grievous public policies that jeopardize not only their children's future, but the welfare of successive generations. This is why I cannot stand the left. I cannot stand them because this is what they're doing. To be clear, not all parental decisions are impactful or consequential in the lives of children. Obviously, not all decisions are equal. Indeed, the most attentive and nurturing parents are not and cannot be conscious of every decision they make, inasmuch as the totality of such decisions is likely incalculable, even on a weekly or monthly basis. And in the healthiest families, the most considered parental decisions based on seemingly prudential judgments can and do produce unintended consequences. Of course, the same can be said of decisions about public policy and governing in a relatively well-functioning community. But there are accepted norms of behavior, a moral order, born of experience and knowledge, instinct and faith, teaching and reason, and love and passion, that provide definition for and boundaries between right and wrong, good and evil, and fairness and injustice, applicable to families and societies alike. Hence, a harmony of virtuous interest, informed by tried and true traditions, customs, values, and institutions, and cultivated within families and the larger community, preserves and improves the human condition, one individual at a time, one generation to the next. Broadly speaking, this is called the civil society. The civil society. Edmund Burke, a political thinker, was born in Ireland and moved to England, where he became a prominent statesman in the 18th century. He explained that the civil society relies on an intergenerational continuum of the past, the living, and the unborn. He wrote that, as the end of such a partnership cannot be obtained in many generations, it becomes a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are dead and those who are yet to be born. In fact, Burke went further, warning that those who forsake this intergenerational continuum condemn themselves, their children, and future generations to a grim existence. He said, one of the first and most leading principles on which the Commonwealth and the laws are consecrated is lest the temporary possessors and life renters in it, unmindful of what they have received from their ancestors or what is due to their posterity, should act as if they were the entire masters, that they should not think it among their rights to cut off the entail or commit waste on the inheritance by destroying at their pleasure the whole original fabric of society, hazarding to leave to those who come after them a ruin instead of a habitation, and teaching these successors as little to respect their contrivances as they had themselves respected the institutions of their forefathers. Genius, absolute genius. And this is what's happening in America. History confirms Burke's observation. To embrace the moral order as parents nurturing their children, yet to abandon the moral order as members of the ruling generation, thereby contributing to predictably deleterious public policies with prospectively calamitous outcomes, is a decadence that leads to unstable and potentially oppressive or even tyrannical conditions, which in the end degrade and dissemble the civil society and consume their children's generation and generations beyond. Reformation and recovery may be possible, but difficult and complicated, and typically only after the exaction of an enormous human toll. Tell me, how many people write like this? I'm just saying, Mr. Producer. I'm in a different world, a different mindset when I sit down and write. I just am. Burke's commentary was motivated by his reflections on the decade-long French Revolution, his revulsion at the anarchy and horror it unleashed. And in the ensuing more than 2 centuries, and up to this very moment, the world has witnessed much worse. This is not to say that all instances of civil and societal dislocation take the form of bloody revolution or civil war. Obviously, there are varying pathologies peculiar to particular doctrines, cultures, governing systems, and so on. There are also differing events and circumstances, some building over time and others descending more abruptly, that contribute to the character of the discontinuity. But violence is the ultimate exposure. Violence is the ultimate exposure. When an economy collapses, you had a little taste of it during the pandemic. The culture, the society follow. I can't think of a single instance in where that wasn't the case. Even in our country, the Great Depression, our country changed forever. And for the worse. Before Burke, Charles de Montesquieu, a French philosopher whose life predated the American Revolution, but who was hugely influential in the Constitution's framers. He also wrote of the disastrous aftermath of the civil society's abandonment. He explained, when that virtue ceases, this is important, folks, when that virtue ceases, ambition enters those hearts that can admit it, and avarice enters them all. Desires change their objects. That which one used to love, one loves no longer. One was free under the laws, one wants to be free against them. Each citizen is like a slave who has escaped from his master's house. What was a maxim is now called severity. What was a rule is now called constraint. What was vigilance is now called fear. Their frugality, not the desire to possess, is avarice. Formerly, the goods of individuals made up the public treasury. The public treasury has now become the patrimony of individuals. The republic is a cast-off husk, and its strength is no more than the power of a few citizens and the license of all. This was written in the 1600s. In modern America, the unraveling of the civil society had been subtly persistent, but is now intensifying. Evidence of rising utopian statism, the allure of political demagogues and self-appointed masterminds peddling abstractions and fantasies in pursuit of a non-existent paradisiacal society, and the concomitant accretion of governmental power in an increasingly authoritarian and centralized federal leviathan abounds. The ruling generation's governing policies are already forecast to diminish the quality of life of future generations. Among other things, witness the massive welfare and entitlement state, which is concurrently expanding and imploding, and the brazen abandonment of constitutional firewalls and governing limitations. If not appropriately and expeditiously ameliorated, the effects will be dire, and the ruling generation knows it. That is, we know it. But we don't give a damn. We won't be around. What about our kids? Which takes us back to the beginning of what I read to you. What about our kids? Don't we care about them? Our kids, our grandkids, maybe the next generation after that? We can't be certain. It's not science. What are we doing to them? What's going to happen to them? Now, I wrote this in 2015. I wrote this 9 years ago. And I dedicated the book to my beloved family, fellow countrymen, and future generations. What do you think's going to happen 25 years ago when I'm gone and people read this book about what's happening in the country? So we come full circle here to this Bloomberg report, and no matter how they ran their computer model, and they ran it over and over and over and over again, indeed, they ran it 1 million simulations. It found that what we are doing to ourselves is unsustainable. And so the mantra that they're going to shut down the government will look awfully quaint and stupid when the entire economy collapses because we didn't shut down the government.